podcast where we talk to smart people, but not necessarily done by smart people?
That is an awesome question.
This one goes down probably on one of my top 5.
Hey, I like nutrition. I like to eat food.
This is the coolest thing ever. We're going to do this forever.
I wish I paid more attention in that class.
You know, I'm going to be honest, I don't understand that. As a man, I don't get it.
Welcome to smartpeoplepodcast.com.
Hello and welcome to Smart People Podcast, conversations that satisfy your curious mind. Filling in as your host today, it's me, John Rojas. You might be asking, where's Chris? Well, Chris is in the process of moving, so he had to take his home studio down. And I'm sure once he starts to get things settled in, he'll have his studio back up and running, and you'll hear his soothing tones once again. We've got a super interesting interview this week. This week we're speaking with Richard Robb. He's a Columbia University economics professor and the CEO of a $5 billion hedge fund, Christofferson, Robb Company. And he has a book coming out in November called Willful: How We Choose What We Do. And if you've been paying attention, you know that I've been sending out newsletters where I've been asking for listener questions for our upcoming guests, and we've got a bunch that we actually address at the end of this episode, so make sure you stay tuned. And of course, if you ever want to ask questions to our upcoming guests, make sure you sign up for our newsletter. Head over to smartpeoplepodcast.com, scroll to the bottom, and sign up for the newsletter there. All right, I'm going to kick it over to Chris and Richard here in a second, but make sure you stay tuned to the end of the interview because you'll hear Richard's take on how to personally invest in the stock market. So here's Chris interviewing Richard Robb. Enjoy.
You and I were talking briefly, and you mentioned how there's two things. One, you have an interesting professional life, both being the professor and a CEO. Also, the path to this book being a little unique. Tell us about how you got to this book, this brand new, amazing book, Willful: How We Choose What We Do, and the path you took to get to where you are.
When I was in graduate school, University of Chicago, getting a PhD in economics, I was drunk on the theory of rational choice. You could explain everything, everywhere we looked, markets, non-markets, in the household. And my classmates and I were certain that the world had revealed its hidden order to us. And yet, at the same time, you know, there were some nagging doubts that we suppressed at the time. And anyway, we graduated. I went out into the world. I didn't go into academics right away. I went into the bond business. I worked for years at a Japanese bank, and then in the year 2001, started up a hedge fund, which continues to this day. So I have adventures in the world that I work into the book, although the book is not a memoir, it's a theory of behavior. I illustrate it with the things that I learned. Sometimes the theories that I had learned in school served me quite well. I felt and still feel like knowing traditional neoclassical economics is my secret weapon that helps me see clearly what people's motives are, why, thinking that agents are rationally pursuing their interests and that markets are in equilibrium. It helps me in decision making and always has and presumably always will. However, there were things that just didn't seem to fit. So what happened is I wrote an academic paper in 2009 called Nietzsche and the Economics of Becoming. The idea of the paper was, okay, a lot of our conduct is choosing to optimize our preferences according to what economic theory would predict, but sometimes there's a different dimension to life. It's partly like a sport or a game where we're not trying to do what's best at each moment. And that sits aside rational choice, that there are two realms. Life is complicated. Why shouldn't it be? Why should it be just one thing? A journalist who I didn't know, Rehan Salam, started writing about it in his column after he read the paper, and he was relating everything to my paper. And then my editor started reading Rehan's articles. And remarkable what he said to me. I still remember. He said, okay, there's rational choice. There is sometimes people fall into mental shortcuts. They make mistakes. They have cognitive bias. Okay, that's a second thing. But from your paper, it seems that there's a third thing, acting on the world, expressing our will, just doing things that are for themselves, that are self-justifying. And I think that's a book. I'm not a new atheist trying to attack the old models because I know how powerful they are, but neither am I a defender of the faith to say that everything that we do can be shoehorned into this one monolithic vision.
Here's one thing that I think will help kind of guide this conversation. From your perspective, I find it fascinating because you have a doctorate in economics, you teach it at Columbia, you run a hedge fund. I mean, your life, I would imagine, is deeply part of economic theory. For those of us that it isn't, we might not even understand why your take on choices is so against the grain.
Before I talk about how I go against the grain, maybe I'll just say a few words about the grain itself. Rational choice, which is the backbone of economic theory, presumes that we know about our preferences. We know what we prefer. We can rank the different options that are available to us. It doesn't mean we have perfect information. We might be disappointed. We might not. We might take a bet and it might go against us, but at least we know which bets we want to take. That we have resources, we have information, we have wealth, we have income, and that we choose what's best given the constraints that we have. It applies to things like how hard to work, which job to take, how much education. It has, if one spouse within the household, the wage of that spouse goes up, they shift from working inside the household to doing more work in the labor market. That means the marginal product, the productivity of the other spouse goes up within the household, so they'll tend to supply less labor. And the literature for 100 years is filled with all kinds of predictions about how this works, and in so many things it produces insights that can achieve in no other way. It's not just for markets. Rational choice in economic theory has expanded in the last 50 years to consider all kinds of problems that had not traditionally been the domain of economics. I mean, take crime, for example. Okay, the economic approach treats crime as just another occupation. So, I mean, as you say, a criminal is not a special kind of person with a unique psychology that has to be understood on their own terms. But just like everybody else, a criminal responds to their incentives. The wage adjusted for the punishment has to be better than the wage that they would get in the non-crime sector. Otherwise, they would go straight. So you don't have to know about the inner workings of the criminal mind in order to say that more severe punishment will deter crime or a higher probability of detection will deter crime. Both of them enter into the potential criminal's decision-making process in a comparable way. So the model tells us if wages go up in the non-crime sector, people will shift away from crime to non-crime. Or to give maybe an even more mundane example, last night we'd gone away for the weekend and we were hurrying back last night to a dinner party, and my wife was exceeding the speed limit. There was a chance of getting caught. The faster she went, the better the chance of getting caught. There's a certain cost she would attribute to getting a ticket, but there's a benefit to being closer to being on time, and all that is weighed one against the other. Now, does she have them? Could she tell me what the mathematical model is that she's pursuing? No, but I think she acts as if she had that model. Economists like to use the example of the billiard player who can't tell you the rules of physics and geometry, but acts as if they could. So people optimize in this way, even though they can't necessarily tell you about it. Or another example that I like that I mentioned in the book is Schopenhauer tells the story of an elephant that has been traveling through Europe and has crossed many bridges, and it comes up against a bridge that it sees men and horses cross, and the elephant stops in its tracks because it's determined that the bridge is not strong enough to carry its weight. And the moral is, even animals, when the stakes are high enough, are pretty smart. And that's the intuition behind rational choice, which I firmly believed to be the dominant way of understanding our behavior. So, well, sometimes we have mental shortcuts and we make systematic mistakes when we try to get what we want. And that's the domain of behavioral economics. We fall victim to cognitive biases, maybe things that were inherited from the ancestral environment. We tend to overstate the importance of small probabilities. So that people buy lottery tickets, even though the chances of winning are basically zero because they think, well, they just don't think it through correctly. Maybe that's true. Someone who was a staunch advocate of rational choice will say, well, yes, but maybe the person buys the ticket for some other reason. It doesn't just have to be financial. Maybe they want to animate their fantasies of having wealth, and it's more fun to fantasize about it if you think at least in principle it could come true. But there are a list of about 150 different cognitive biases. And, another thrust of the last 25 or 30 years has been happiness research or positive psychology. Or the critique is that we don't really know our natures well enough to know what we want. And we may think that we want to be rich, but really we just want to get richer. The things that matter is the rate of change, not the level, or to be richer than the guy next door. So two of their themes are habituation, what matters is the change, or rivalry, how well you're doing compared to the person next to you. The counter argument that someone in my background might give is that, well, how do I know how happy I am compared to somebody else? All I can see is what they do, and self-reported happiness doesn't have a lot of empirical content. When I'm asked how happy am I can say, well, compared to what? Compared to how I used to be? Well, that would imply that if things are better, I'll say I'm happy, and that explains one of their empirical findings. Or compared to the person next to me, I guess I can say I appear to be doing better than them. Yeah, okay, I'm happy. And that explains rivalry. One of the findings, the cross-country comparisons of happiness, kind of nutty to me. And people in Moldova report that they're happier than people in South Korea, even though they have GDP per capita of $1,900 in Moldova and $28,000 in South Korea. Somalia has the same self-reported happiness as Italy. So I think it might tell you more about how people respond to questions about how happy they are than it does about something that's real and substantive. My thesis is that some things just can't be crammed in to the model of purposeful choice. We can identify types of behaviors that just don't fit. Let's say that a woman sees her husband fall into a river, and she's trying to decide whether or not she should jump in to save him. Does she calculate the present value of the services that she expects to get from her husband over his life and multiply by the probability that she'll save him minus the chance that he'll save himself? And then from that deduct the probability she'll drown and multiply that by the value that she attributes to her own life? Of course not. She jumps in to save him because it's her husband who she loves, and any attempt to try to justify her decision, to try to explain it in terms of some other reason, would be, as a philosopher called, one thought too many. It's not a decision that's made with reference to whether this is better or worse than that. It's bigger than all the other kinds of calculations that she might make. It's not just for the great big decisions. There can be very simple gestures. Let's say that you're riding the subway to work, as I do, and sometimes people will hold the door for a stranger who they see rushing. And I used to think, well, the person is just confused because if they're trying to improve the social good in any coherent way, they'll notice that they're going to keep 500 people delayed for 10 seconds in order to help save one person 3 minutes. And that's it's a very lopsided cost to society as a whole. But Over time I realized, okay, that maybe the passengers on the subway sees the one person, and it's a gesture that is bigger than a calculation. It's just a random altruistic gesture directed towards one person, and it's part of what it is to be a human being. To take kind of a dramatic example, one of the three areas where I think that rational choice runs up against its limits is one of them is altruistic gestures, sort of a taxonomy of altruism. Certainly, sometimes we might engage in philanthropy to try to signal virtue, to show that you can be trusted and that you're a cooperative, pro-social person. I'm sure there's some of that in a lot of charitable activities, but I think it would be a terribly cynical and incorrect view to say that's all there is. I mean, all that falls within rational choice. You have rules, you attribute costs to these things, and you can see it as part of a big optimization problem that you undertake whether you know it or not. Let's say in my daily life, on Sundays, I usually go out to the bakery and get a scone for my wife, because the cost to me of getting a scone is less than the benefit that she'll derive. And I care about her. To use the economic jargon, her utility function is an argument in my own utility function. So if I can undertake a cost that will give a bigger benefit to her, we act like a single optimizing unit. But if I'm busy and in a rush, or if it's cold and raining, I might not go to get the scone, because then the cost goes up and the benefit to her stays the same, and she'll understand that I didn't get it because it was freezing rain outside, and no harm is done. So in those extreme cases where you're very close to someone and you act as a single optimizing unit, or at the opposite extreme where you're just doing a favor for somebody in hopes of getting a future favor, it's kind of selfish altruism. You can also see that as in terms of rational choice. But in the middle, there can be gestures that have no explanation. Maybe let's use as the example the character who is synonymous with altruism, the Good Samaritan. In the biblical parable, he sees a man beaten by the side of the road. He stops to see if he's alive or dead and get him on his feet. That's completely normal. That's what you would expect him to do. But then the Good Samaritan goes beyond all that. He takes the man to an inn. He pays the innkeeper to look after him. He lavishes all his attention on just one man. There's no sense, in which that's optimal. It's just, he could take those resources and go find other beaten men on the side of the road. And that would promote social interests more in an objective way, more than just these extravagant gesture towards the one man. Would we say that the Good Samaritan has fallen prey to a cognitive bias that he better start thinking more clearly so he can be an even better Samaritan? I don't think so. I think we can look at this and say, okay, well, we can appreciate it and we can admire it, but we can't force it into rational choice.
Let me ask that's an interesting example. And here's where I'm trying to square this. Why can't we simply say in that one that the Good Samaritan is doing it for evolutionary reasons, right? So both let's look out for our common man, right? We're tribal as a society. And one theory I've heard is everything we do is selfish. And I kind of sometimes agree, right? So in that moment, he helps this man and he realizes, wow, I feel good. I'm going to keep helping him to keep feeling better and convince myself that I'm doing it because it's a good choice. I'm helping somebody, but in reality, I'm doing it because I continue to derive value personally.
Look, I can't argue with that. If we didn't desire to do something, we wouldn't do it. You can say that about all kinds of actions, and there's no way to dispute that. My concern is, when are we choosing something because it's better than the other things that we might be choosing?
Wait, let me pause there. That's awesome. When are we choosing something because it's better than the other things? Is that right?
better than the other things that we could be choosing. And if our model of this man is to help his, from an evolutionary aspect, to help his fellows so the whole tribe can get along. Okay, he could, why go overboard with this one guy?
I see. So, and this is, again, I think a lot of it, and I think how this conversation will go is you have such a depth of knowledge. I'm trying to bring it back to, okay, let me get it from my perspective. Rational choice is, we always have a choice, and we are constantly kind of doing an internal equation on, is my time, energy, effort being optimized to the best result? And what you're saying is, of course, there are many times when we do something where it doesn't meet that model. And this is an example.
Yeah, and we do it for itself. It's self-justifying. It's just because. And
I see.
One example is an altruism. Another example is when we act out of the beliefs that we hold, that matter to us, that form our identity. And, we might hold a belief that, may go against the data, or new data comes and we cling to our pre-existing belief that makes up who we are. And, maybe there would be a more effective and better belief that we could adopt it. But why do I want to change my beliefs in order to gratify the desires of the new person that I might become? That's another realm, because our beliefs are not always for sale. And even if they could help us gratify our desires, you can say, well, that's rational. Just make a belief adjustment cost and put that in your utility function. But because of all of the interactions between, unless you have like a homunculus, a little person who's sitting on top of you, who says, okay, we can change this belief, that'll create new preferences. The new belief will be more effective and will help us gratify those new preferences, but then that's a different person. And then you have to ask, well, what's the homunculus trying to, what are the desires and preferences of the homunculus? And then you end up with this intractable problem in the end. So the beliefs and identity are another realm that we want to be who we are, and we will pay an indeterminate price in order to do that. And the third, just to complete my picture of action, is with time. That sometimes when we're choosing whether to consume or work, or how hard to work, or how to arrange our activities through time, the notion that we're sitting at this present and that we're looking at future incarnations of ourselves, and that we evaluate the well-being of all those different future people. Even, let's just assume perfect certainty here to make the argument as simple as possible. So I want to decide to work now or later, and how much I would, and let's assume that I view work as a chore, and I want to consider how much leisure I'll have at different points in time. And I look at the well-being of all the future Richard Robbs out there and say, well, okay, I'll work a little bit each day so each of them can relax, or I'll work hard now so we can save and earn a return on the savings, and the other ones out in the future can relax. That would be the rational choice notion of how we navigate through time. And I argue that that's not how it is. It's not the way that we are. And in fact, they're great problems if we try to look more deeply into the foundations of that model and make it square with rationality. In fact, some of this was known by economists 100 years ago, but it seems to have been forgotten. And it leads to, when we don't actually behave this way, it leads to this view that economists propagate on the world, that we have a pathological relationship to time. We tend to look into the future, and I might say, 5 years, I'll trade this amount of income 5 years from now versus 6 years from now. But when when 5 years pass and year 5 turns into the present, then I'll reverse how I feel about year 5 and year 6. I may say, well, I'll take $100 in year 5 versus $110 in year 6. That might seem fine to me now. But then when year 5 becomes the present. I want to splurge, and I'll change how I trade off year 6 for year 5. These kind of anomalies like that have become an important part of behavioral economics. And I argue that no, it's not a failure for us to become rational, but life is often more like a sport or a game where we seek to overcome obstacles and that arise authentically in our path. And then if we, and work, for example, has 2 characters. It's partly a game and that we play with a team sport with our coworkers, and we try to beat other firms or to accomplish certain objectives. And then part of it is fits in with obtaining resources to meet our material needs. It has 2 characters. And if we try to understand it only as one, we'll miss a lot of the important features. Or to take a very simple example, procrastination.
Let's take a quick break for a word from one of our sponsors. If you're still using one of the big wireless providers in 2019, have you asked yourself what you've been paying for? Between expensive retail stores, inflated prices, and hidden fees, you're being taken advantage of because they know you'll pay. Enter Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile provides the same premium network coverage you're used to, but at a fraction of the cost because everything is online. Mint Mobile saves on retail locations and overhead, then passes those savings directly to you. I've had Mint Mobile service for about 4 or 5 months now, and I can honestly say the coverage is better than when I had AT&T. It's just absolutely phenomenal. And I always have access to fast data. Mint Mobile makes it easy to cut your wireless bill down to just $15 a month. Every plan comes with unlimited nationwide talk and text. With Mint Mobile, stop paying for unlimited data you'll never use. Choose between plans with 3, 8, or 12 gigabytes of 4G LTE data. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone number along with all your existing contacts. Ditch your old wireless bill and start saving with Mint Mobile. So listen up. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/smart. That's mintmobile.com/smart. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/smart. And now back to the episode.
Yeah, I wanted to get into procrastination actually, because I know you mentioned that in your book. But before we do, because I want to talk about procrastination, I'm really trying to wrap my head around this. And I have a question that might help me do this. So let's say I asked an economist about rational choice. They could give me a maybe simple explanation, which is we make decisions to try to maximize outcomes or our preferences. I ask a behaviorist, we make decisions based on the way our brain has evolutionarily developed itself and based on biases and mental shortcuts. I ask the philosopher of happiness. I know you mentioned that, right? And it's based on our habits, or perhaps it's our rivalry against others. So it's kind of this quick, maybe one line overgeneralization, which I realize is difficult for somebody who spends so much of their time explaining why overgeneralization does not work. But if somebody said, hey, Richard, tell me in one sentence what your kind of one-liner is on what this other model is, what would that be?
I want to answer that, Chris, but I would like to make one edit to the comment about the behaviorist.
Yes.
You say, yes, we act on these mental biases in an attempt to maximize our preferences. So the behaviorist starts out, we're just like the rational actor. We know what our preferences are, but we mess it up because we fall victim to these biases.
I love that. Thank you. No, that's a really important edit. Thank you. Yeah.
And what I would say, since I'm confined to a sentence, and I'll assume no semicolons, sometimes things just stand for themselves.
What I'm confused about is not being an economist or behavioralist or somebody who focuses on this. I can't imagine somebody saying that doesn't happen, right? Like that this is a completely revelatory thought. And I know it is, right? I mean, there are Nobel laureates who have said about your work and about your book, this is new, like this is a new model. And so how is that somebody didn't just come along and say, yes, sometimes we just do things. I
Right.
don't know. I don't know.
Well, because that's the whole thrust of our field is say, yeah, but we do things for a reason, and let's figure out the reason. And I'm part of that enterprise. Usually, if you think hard enough, you can figure out why somebody did something. But to show that there are these sectors, how overcoming obstacles and that arise in our path, that why do people work until the day they die when they already have enough? Because they just don't understand. Is it because they want to leave an endowment for their heirs? People who don't have heirs, or their heirs already have enough, they'll still keep doing it because it's the game that they play. Sometimes this is hard to see too, because we're very good at rationalizing. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful word, it explains it fits neatly with what I'm trying to say. After we undertake an action, we can be quite good at explaining why we did it. Like a person who hears a dog barking in their dream, and then they can recast the dream so that the barking dog plays a role in it.
Yes.
And we do that all day long. And sometimes we do things just because, for sport, just acting on the world, exercising our will. And then we wrap it all together with, well, I did it for this reason or that reason, if you really must know. And we believe those explanations when we tell them to ourselves. But my point is that sometimes that engaging in thinking about how we organize ourselves through time, that there isn't a best way and that there isn't a worst way, because there is no best, because we're not trying to optimize. And that, this whole business about we need commitment devices, and because we are so dysfunctional that we have to buy gym memberships or force ourselves to save in 401ks, and so that we can't get out of it because we just lack the discipline to know what to do. That we have what economists call preference reversals, or even, to use an even fancier term, non-exponential discounting, because to show that if we were really on our game, we would look at all those future selves, and then we would lay out a plan and we would optimize for them. Why? Why does life have to be that way? And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have an advantage over other people, that you'll get into some kind of trouble if you don't behave that way. And there are commitment devices that can be conflated with the idea that we need to commit all our future selves in order to be functional. If you take, maybe I'll say a word or two about those. The classic one is Odysseus in the Odyssey, that he wants to hear the siren song. So he has the sailors tie him to the mast, and puts wax in their ears. So, because if he hears the song, he'll swim to them and then they'll kill him. So he has to bind himself ahead of time to the mast in order to constrain himself to not jump in the water. Or another example, this is maybe from the pre-Uber days, but you go to a party and drive to a party, and you know that you're going to drink and that you might drive back and make a bad decision, so you give your keys to the neighbor. And then just take one other example. You put the alarm clock on the opposite side of your room from your bed, so you don't just hit the alarm clock and go back to sleep, to try to constrain yourself in the morning to get up out of bed when you need to wake up.
Sure.
Okay. Those three things have something in common. They are anticipating a temporary non-rational state in the near future. Odysseus knows he's going to fall under the siren's sway. The party goer knows he's going to be drunk, and the person setting the alarm clock knows they're going to feel groggy in the morning. Okay. But for ordinary life, when we're thinking about, myself a year from now or sometime in the future, there's no reason why I have to make tough choices on behalf of that person. If there's anything wrong with the choice that that person is going to want to make, when they can freely make those choices in the future. So the fact that there is no arrangement, that if I were to say, okay, right now, today, in 2019, I can make a choice for all my future selves. And that choice might not be the choice that those future selves would want to make when they turn into present selves. That is not like the Odysseus or the party goer. It's a much more fundamental notion about how we think of ourselves in time. And the fact that we don't look at it that way doesn't mean we're broken. And I propose an alternative way of thinking about time.
I'm starting to grasp it. And I like the explanation you just gave there, because what the seeming biggest difference is, one is short term and one is long term. I can be, and so I'm always asking these questions for you to just tell me where I'm wrong, essentially. But if I do the thing about the alarm clock, I can be pretty sure that in 12 hours, whenever that is, I'm going to be the same person with the same needs and the same goals and everything. But if I have to imagine out 1, 5, 10 years, my certainty on being the same person is so low that I can't trust my present self to make the best choices or better choices than that person. That's how I view it.
That's a correct point, but that's not the point that I'm trying to make.
Okay.
I can take it even further than that. I know who I'm going to be in the future. I'm going to be just like I am now. Suppose that.
Okay.
I suppose I have perfect certainty about the world. There's no ambiguity. There's no surprises. Even then, I'm going to want it. The path. If a genie came to me and said, "Okay, you have this much wealth. You can spread it out over the next number of years, and determine how hard each person is going to work. Each future version of yourself is going to work." And I say, "Okay, here's what I'll pick." There's this once and for all moment right here in 2019 where I pick these choices. Then time passes, and the future versions of myself are going to want to get out. They'll pay the genie to get out of this if they could, because it no longer is what those future people want.
Right.
So I haven't changed at all, and I haven't obtained any new information. And if that's the case, so what? There are lots of things I have preferences over. I'm going to rent an apartment. One is a more convenient location, one's in better condition, one is bigger, and there are 20 other things we could all list. I weigh all those things and I pick what's best. Fair enough. That's rational choice. And another apartment comes along that's different in some features, I can say which one I prefer to the other. If I'm going to get along in the world, if I'm going to have a life that's remotely successful to me and achieving my needs in light of my resources, I should be able to make choices like that. But I don't have to say how I would lay out all the different activities of future incarnations of myself right now and make a plan that I would willingly stick to, because it's not like that. The demon or the genie who proposes these constraints, there is no such genie like that. Mm-hmm. And so I make choices fresh at each moment as they occur. And I can change my mind. I can shift directions. I can try to achieve a goal. Okay, I achieved it. And now here's some new goal or some new challenge that I want to overcome. Here's some adversity. And overcoming adversity is part of living a full life. But you don't go and buy it at the adversity store. It has to come naturally. And you can't plan for it and make it happen.
There's a thing that is, I wanted to mention it on two examples you've given. One, you mentioned, why do people work until they die? And then this example of the future self. One thing I've often thought is we are simply a slave to the drugs that our body creates. It sounds like even this idea of making decisions as we go, not wanting to kind of have a set path, is because life would be boring, right? And why does that matter? Well, because we wouldn't get the emotion that defines the life for many of us. So again, why do I think a lot of times people work until they die? It's fear of having to make decisions for themselves instead of just going to work and being told what to do. And then we can rationalize it by money or status or whatever. Would that fall under the happiness framework that you discussed earlier? Where does emotion and actual chemical response to an emotion fit into all of this?
The underlying mechanism of what's going on in the brain is outside of my area. And, much of what you say resonates with me. You go to work, I plan to keep working till the very end. If God willing, I'm able to do it. And because I like it. I like the challenges of it, and I've been able to convince myself that they're meaningful and that I like working with my colleagues, both at Columbia and at my fund for as long as I can. And, but then I become steeped in my own theory, so I don't find that really problematic that I'm not yearning to retire. And also I have good jobs, so it doesn't necessarily.
Right. Well, and that's kind of what I'm wondering too. So the fear example I gave, I guess, is one that is a bias of mine, but it could also be just, hey, I enjoy it. So where does that fall in all of this?
I tell the story in the book of when I worked at a bank and the bank was merged with another bank and I was set free. This was kind of a turning point for me too, that I should have mentioned at the outset. When I essentially was fired from my bank at the time, not because of anything I'd done. There was a merger, and there was no place for me. I had all the leisure that I wanted, and I thought, this is great. This is what economics said should satisfy me. And I would get up in the morning and help make breakfast for my children, who were maybe 9 and 13 at the time. Send them off to school. Read the newspaper, run around the reservoir, and then it's 9 a.m. And the whole day stretches out in front of you. And I thought, okay, well, it must be a lack of imagination that I can't fill this more productively. But without being part of having these challenges to overcome that arise on the job, it was a kind of emptiness that I didn't expect. I was able to go and get a teaching gig, and then which turned into a full-time job, and we started our fund, and back in with lots of obstacles and challenges to overcome. But that doesn't fit in to, you can't put those challenges into a utility function. You have to wait for them to come, embrace them on those circumstances. Look, you want to exercise your agency and your will in the world, but if you said, okay, I'm going to have a certain amount of will, and I want to trade off an amount of will for having a bigger kitchen, then it's not will. It's just you become victimized. You become a tool of your preferences. You become a passive entity that's just solving this problem of these preferences. Maybe you can shape the preferences, but there's no time. None of it is essentially human. The human actions are for themselves, picking a challenge that you embrace naturally in the context of your life, and then you succeed or you fail, and then find a new one. And they don't have to be glamorous or necessarily socially important, and they happen on large time frames, small time frames throughout the day. And my point is they sit alongside this realm of optimization and rationality, and that life is twofold. It's a mixed drink, as I call it.
And now a quick word from this week's sponsor. If anyone listens to the podcast on a regular basis, you know about my health journey. I've bounced from diet to diet, tried CrossFit, and a million other things. Even on certain diets, sometimes I just didn't feel right, and I always wanted to dig in to figure it out. That's why I was so excited to find out about Everlywell. I took their food sensitivity test and found out that I have a high sensitivity to cow's milk. Who knew? And now I eat accordingly. Everlywell offers more than 30 at-home lab tests, from food sensitivity to thyroid to STD and heart health tests. Each Everlywell collection kit comes with super easy to follow instructions. Collect your sample from home on your own time. Once you send your sample back, it's processed in a certified lab. Your results are reviewed by a board-certified physician, then they are sent directly to you digitally within just days. You can even share them with your healthcare provider. The Everlywell digital platform helps break down exactly what your results mean for you. Plus, you can also set up a free discussion with a healthcare professional directly through the Everlywell platform. To start learning more about your health like I did, check out Everlywell at-home lab tests today. For 15% off an Everlywell at-home lab test, visit everlywell.com/smartpeople and enter code SMARTPeople. That's everlywell.com/smartpeople, code SMARTPeople for 15% off your test. Everlywell, at-home lab tests. Your answers, your way. And now back to the episode.
Well, and going back to trying to follow this line of thinking along one example, again, going back to working until you die, what you're saying is, Chris, by the explanation you gave, it's still rational choice because you're still making the decision based off of your preference, whether that preference be to live in fear or to live in happiness or to live in, so let's take your example. You said, I do it because I enjoy it and I like the challenges. Therefore, rational behavior would define it as, yes, Richard is still working because his preference is to come to work and solve tough problems and feel accomplished. Therefore, it's a rational choice. And what you're saying is there's something else alongside that.
I'm playing a game. It's like a sport. In a sport, you don't always stop and say, is this better or worse? You're just playing. It's a flow. And, it's not a sequence of moments where you pick which one is better than the other. The person who works until the end, in your example, because they're afraid to be responsible for their own time, and then they rationalize it in some other way. I mean, I think that's kind of rough to say that they're lacking the freedom and the courage, because that's just the way that they want to live. But I would say that person would be acting for itself outside of rational choice, that they can't say that. It'd be hard to say how they're mad that this job gives them a bundle of benefits for giving up their time, and that if they could get those benefits in some different way, they would switch, and that they're constantly evaluating whether to switch. I would say that they've embraced this challenge of this work, and maybe it's not the challenge that you and I would pick, and maybe it feels more like fear than like joy or excitement, but it's still their challenge that they've embraced.
I think we've made progress. So I want to go to this now. Let's bring this to the everyday listener. How does this help us, this understanding, help us make better choices? Or does it? Because I think a lot of the rationalists are the ones saying, here's what you do to make better choices, because that's all based on a desired outcome, but yours isn't. So I'm curious, how do we use that?
And that's a really good, that's a really central question. And so what? I can say, well, rational choice is only a model. It's never supposed to be a perfect description, and I can find some things that lie outside the model. But, I don't find that persuasive, because a lot of the things that lie outside the model are pretty important to our lives, our identities, our engagement with time, our interactions with other people. I think it's fair to ask what benefits you can get. And I think, although benefit is in a sense kind of an odd word when I'm talking about things that are just stand for themselves. I think it can help us become, seeing this schema for our action can help us become more productive in the old-fashioned sense. A lot of the book is about investing and about how understanding that limits to the formation of belief create rigidities within firms, and how we can become better investors. You'd mentioned earlier procrastination, and we never got to that, but I can say that, just in a word, sometimes letting problems build up and coming up against a deadline just makes boring tasks more fun. Why not? That doesn't, I'm not talking about harnessing special powers that you get when you're under pressure. Maybe that's true, maybe not. I don't know, but it certainly makes dull tasks more exciting. And why can't you weave a little bit of that into your life and not feel that you have to somehow fix yourself? So in a sense, I don't want to present myself as a self-help guru. I'm an economist, but I think it can make us more at ease with some of the things that we already do.
I have to pause you there because coming from an economist, as soon as you said that, I literally felt this visceral sense of relief. Given, and I think this is a very key, very, very key point for many listening, especially given that the foundation of this podcast was an assumption that there's a better life out there for John and I, and if we just get enough information, we'll find it. And I think that hypothesis has varied and come to fruition in some aspects. But one of the things it sounds like you're presenting is it's the anti-rationalist, because you don't always have to be thinking in terms of maximizing value. And in my opinion, that is one of the greatest stressors today, especially when we see all the Instagrams and Facebooks. People are constantly worried in the moment. I'm making a decision based off a feeling. Maybe this is what you call will. However, I could probably be making a better decision to maximize value. And that creates conflict, which is leading to these negative emotions. Did you ever set out or think about it that way?
Yeah, I do. Let me answer this, Chris, in terms of one more example. Okay, there's a paradox that behavioral economists is popular for them. That they point out that it's inconsistent that if you don't hire somebody to mow your lawn for $8, you mow your own lawn. Then you turn down the opportunity to mow a similar size lawn for $20. And that's supposed to be due to they argue that that's attributed to a cognitive bias, that you're not thinking clearly. But, an irrational choice economist might point to different reasons, that if you hire yourself out as a mower, you would have diminished status among your neighbors, or there'd be transactions cost in negotiating the terms of the job, and you'd have to pay extra income tax. And then if you hired a mower, you want to do your own grass, because if you hired a mower, you have to coordinate and monitor that person, and that's going to impose additional costs. So it's just as it's more efficient for you to cut your own, but not somebody else's grass. But I think it's unconvincing. I think that people who would mow their own grass, as I have when I had a lawn in a different life, and they mow their own grass, but they wouldn't do their neighbors for pay, even if they could work in disguise to uphold their status, so there are no income taxes, or quality are easier to monitor. You just, it's a physical challenge, and maybe you have a life that doesn't have many physical challenges in it. So you want to get out there and wear yourself out you can rationalize it and say that I do a better job than the gardener, or I can't find a good gardener or something. You can come up with whatever you want to tell yourself that this is a rational choice, but it isn't. It's just something that you do for itself, and that's a segment of a full life, and to recognize it, not to, as you were suggesting, not to feel bullied into having it by this logic, to have to explain it in terms of what's the point, what are you getting out of it, why is this best, and then an answer just like a child would answer, just because, and that's a valid answer, but it's not the whole show. Sometimes, most of the time, we are, the economists have it right, but a lot of the times they don't. And we can draw the boundary line between them, and the things that are not in the purposeful world, that are in the for itself world, we can still say a lot about it. I don't think it's going to be as easy to make mathematical models, because math deals with things that can be abstracted from their context and understood due to their essential features, and things that are for itself deal with the individual. The one man that the Good Samaritan is saving, the one challenge that you embrace, the one belief that's your own belief that you're not going to trade and give up, even if it would move you along, because it's you are who you are. But it doesn't mean we can say nothing about it.
I really am so glad we've gotten to this point. I find it fascinating, and I could also imagine there are economists that view your work as almost heresy, right? It's like, no, we need to be able to define it based on this value proposition. And before we wrap up, I have two very quick well, they're not quick questions, but they're from our listeners. And if you could try to give them one that they could take with them, I think that's what they were looking for. These are those very specific ones. So the first is a question from Alex. And Alex kind of asked, what advice would you give to the non-professional investor? And I think that's fantastic. Coming from this discussion we've had, getting through theory and understanding it, but also with your background running a hedge fund, now let's take it to the person out there who's trying to make a little more money, save for retirement, etc. What's your kind of best piece of advice there?
Okay, I like that question very much. I have a chapter in the book on making money in financial markets, or how to make money. And that is kind of heretical for somebody in my situation, because I'm supposed to say that markets are generally efficient, which they generally are, and that you'll never beat them, and that what Alex ought to do is put half his money in an index fund and an ETF, keep his transactions cost down, and put the other half in the bank. And that's not the worst advice anybody ever gave, but that's not my advice. My advice is that there's certain investments that it's reasonable that Alex could have an advantage over. Let's take institutions such as my own fund. Okay, we can't do anything we want, and we can't hold on forever. If we take a bet and the bet goes against us, we have a provisional grasp over our resources. Investors will want to take their money out if it looks like we're sticking to our guns for too long. Alex can hold on as long as he wants. I think the euro is undervalued at this moment compared to the US dollar, but it could get worse, and it could take a long time for euro-denominated investments to turn around. Or the same way, I think I'd say the same thing about the Mexican peso. I think because Alex can possess, he can coordinate. He doesn't have the resources of a big institutional investor, and may not have their training and background, but within his own mind, he can coordinate a decision and say, okay, I think that stocks are overvalued right now, which I actually think they are. I'm going to just get out of them, and I'm going to wait, and I'll wait for the market to crack, and then I'll buy them. Or residential real estate in his own neighborhood. Houses don't always go up. And they have in the United States, in most places, in Alex's lifetime and mine. But he can know things, private knowledge that can't be abstracted and transmitted and optimized by funds like mine, and be able to act. He's, to use Hayek's term, he can be the man on the spot. The man on the spot has knowledge of time and place that can't be readily transmitted to another person. And if it is readily transmitted to another person, if I have private knowledge that I can somehow win over an analyst at a pension fund, that analyst isn't necessarily going to be able to pass that on to the investment committee. There are basic limits to how people can share this deeply personal knowledge. And an individual can sometimes, I don't think he should trade actively unless he wants to do it as a hobby. But that wasn't the premise of the question. The question is that Alex wants to be a good investor. I also don't think he should be intimidated by efficient market theory to have to diversify more than he wants to, because people generally don't. Why not? Because owning 5 stocks that appeal to him and that he feels he understands that may appear cheap to him based on what insight he has, and then to hang on to those over time. Why not? There's no evidence that that's going to lose out over time, or that he needs to do the most orthodox thing. So I think he should feel free to, as long as he doesn't trade too much and generate needless taxes or transactions costs, and tries to exercise his judgment where he feels he may have some advantage over other people. One other thing I'd caution him against is listening to so-called experts that have specific things that they think he should do. Because when the expert takes the information, converts it into a signal that they can transmit to all of their listeners, then that signal is already degraded and there's nothing special about it. That signal is going out to everybody. And Alex should do his own thing as he sees fit.
I love that last piece. And it translates in so many different areas, not just financial investing. I mean, as simple as, and I know this is ridiculous, but fantasy football or sports in general, predicting outcomes. It's so true. It's something I've done for a long time. Not necessarily great, but not bad, poorly. But what you just said is kind of at the core of it. The last one from a listener is from Dave. I know Dave to some extent, and I know he has a big passion underlying all this. He asks if you believe there's a growing trend in quote unquote green. He said specifically away from fossil fuels. And if you do believe that, do you think that there is also a trend that we could jump on for a greener investment strategy?
Okay, let me break that into several bits. First, I think that Dave is going to make more money by investing in green investments because hopefully the world is headed that way. And, I don't see why he would. I mean, this is all well known. But if, as an expression of his own, if he feels, it's not going to, I tell this story in the book of the development of my fund of Thanet offshore wind in the Thames estuary and how we, and I don't want to spoil the ending if people are going to read the book, but we lost our shirts in that one. Because things don't always, this isn't always a Disney movie when you make these investments. We did get it built. And at the time it was the world's largest offshore wind farm. And then it's in the Thames estuary of 300 megawatts. It wasn't it was a commercial investment. There were subsidies in the UK that, we relied upon. And just our timing on this was very unlucky, and probably some errors in judgment as well. Definitely some errors in judgment as well on the part of myself and my partners. We didn't do it because it was green. We did it because it was an opportunity that we thought we had advantages and be able to exploit. But simple rules like that, I think, and there isn't that much to invest in. I mean, he cannot invest in fossil fuels because, whether he sells his shares in ExxonMobil and somebody else is going to buy them, it's not going to change the amount of greenhouse gases. Bill Gates said recently that divesting from the carbon economy has no difference on the impact on the environment, something I've long believed, and I'm glad that he said it because a lot of people listen to it. That's not the way to solve social problems that we all care about. I think doing this through investing is, if he's if he has some venture, if Dave is knowledgeable in science and he's got a project that he thinks is going to move the needle, then, of course, we're all for it. But I think going into public markets and trying to invest on these themes is very difficult. But if he likes it, and there's certain things like I'm not going to invest in a tobacco company. There aren't that many of them that are publicly traded. I mean, I know that if I buy or sell, it's not going to change the total amount of smoking in the world. It's just purely symbolic, and it doesn't make me more virtuous than anybody else. I just don't like the idea of making money off of selling cigarettes, but it's a personal thing. I wouldn't. I'm not going to think ill of somebody else who does it. In fact, when Ben Bernanke, former Federal Reserve chairman, was in his confirmation hearing in Congress, he reveals his personal investments, and his only investment was the time Philip Morris, I believe, because he figured other people like me are selling it, so it must be undervalued. So he's going to put all his money into that. I still have a high opinion of him, whether he did that or not. So I guess I come back to days. It's just a personal decision, but I don't think it's a recipe for making more money by picking on these trends that are well known and trying to jump on the bandwagon.
Well, Richard, that was awesome. I love those. I think we're going to have to try and get some more kind of specific questions from the audience, because I think we got to some really cool specific answers. And I want to, with that, wrap this up. I have really appreciated kind of you walking me through this. I understand this is an area that, I might not be as well-versed as many, and definitely not even close to as well-versed as you, but I like where we got to. And I think it is also an encouragement to those who feel the same kind of, I feel 10% there. I want to recommend your book, which is Willful: How We Do What We Do. So before we wrap things up, I just want to turn it over to you and say, is there anything else you'd like to plug, or anywhere else you would like to guide our listeners before we end this?
Thank you for that, Chris. I don't have anything else to plug other than the book. If listeners think they find it useful, I'm great. When I know that people have read the book, I feel quite touched by the personal basis. Unlike academic articles that I've written, here's what I have to say. Okay, fine. But because the book is so personal, and when people read it, and I know that they've read it, I feel very touched by it. And to the extent that people want to have a look at it, I'm grateful for the exposure, and it's fun talking to you. So thank you for all this.
Another episode in the books. Hope you enjoyed that interview with Richard Robb. And as a reminder, his book, Willful: How We Choose What We Do, can be found at your local bookstore and on Amazon. And as always, if you decide to purchase the book through Amazon, please make sure you do so at our Smart People Podcast Amazon link, located at smartpeoplepodcast.com/Amazon. Any purchase you make through that link greatly helps support the show. And if you're looking for other free and easy ways to support the show, head over to iTunes or Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. And if you'd like to stay tuned to all things Smart People Podcast, sign up for the newsletter over at smartpeoplepodcast.com. If you'd like to reach out to the show, you can email us at smartpeoplepodcast@gmail.com or message us on Twitter at smartpeoplepod. All right, that's it for the housekeeping this week. We've got a lot of great interviews coming up, so make sure you stay tuned. Subscribe to the podcast, tell your friends about it, just spread the word about Smart People Podcast, and we'll see you all next episode.